by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's such it's a heinous crime. People are so shocked by what...
Queen Camilla believed the contents of Clarence House were protected by tradition, marriage, and the authority of the crown. Then a sealed legal file arrived, and within minutes, that certainty collapsed. Solicitors had completed their review, the inheritance had been confirmed, and the verdict was unmistakable. Princess Anne, not Camilla, would receive the historic Clarence House collection. What followed was not merely disappointment, it was devastation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla sat alone when she broke the seal. Clarence House was more than a royal residence. It was a London home tied to generations of family history, and its collection held inherited furniture, private letters, ceremonial silver, paintings, jewels, and personal objects linked to those before her. She had arranged rooms around these pieces, and treated them as part of the life she had built with King Charles. Now every line seemed to tell her that familiarity had never become ownership. The Queen reached Anne's name and stopped. Her hand tightened around the letter, her face changed, and she lowered herself into a chair before finishing the final page. The decision was brutally clear. Royal solicitors had formally confirmed that Princess Anne would inherit control of the Clarence House collection under a binding private arrangement. A binding private arrangement is a legally enforceable family agreement that cannot be changed by personal wishes. Camilla would have no authority to retain, redistribute, or remove its most important pieces. Charles entered moments later and saw the document trembling in her hand. The king asked what had happened, but she did not answer immediately. She looked at him with disbelief and hurt, then forced out a single sentence. "You knew this could happen." He stood still, because denial would have sounded cruel, yet admission would have sounded like betrayal. He had known an old arrangement existed, but he had never told her how far its power might reach. The file revealed something more disturbing. This decision had not been created overnight, and Anne had not simply stepped forward to claim what Camilla valued. The legal language had existed quietly for years, shielded from her by restrictions she had never been allowed to examine in full. Then she noticed a handwritten notation in the margin: "Preservation after interference." Those 3 words changed everything. The inheritance was not only about tradition. It was a response to an incident inside Clarence House, and as Camilla stared at the name written above her own, the real wound began to emerge. Not what Anne had inherited, but why the collection had been placed beyond Camilla's reach. To understand why the decision cut so deeply, one must understand the 2 women standing on opposite sides of it. Camilla had made Clarence House her sanctuary, the place where she believed acceptance had finally replaced suspicion. Anne had never needed such acceptance. She carried her position with the cold certainty of someone raised to protect the institution before protecting anyone's feelings. Now their different worlds had collided inside one inheritance. Camilla walked slowly through the morning room, carrying the solicitor's decision in one hand. Clarence House had held private celebrations, painful conversations, and the long years in which she learned to survive judgment without showing how deeply it wounded her. She stopped beside an antique chair she had personally placed near the fireplace and rested her fingers against its carved back. For years, that chair had felt like part of her marriage to Charles. Now she understood it could be removed under Princess Anne's authority. A royal custodian is the family member trusted to preserve inherited objects for future generations rather than treat them as personal possessions, and Anne had always viewed that duty as more important than comfort. Anne received her own copy of the confirmation without visible surprise. She read each page carefully, closed the file, and placed her pen beside it. Her private secretary waited for a reaction, but the Princess Royal offered only 5 quiet words. "Then it will be protected." She did not sound triumphant. She sounded resolved. To her, the collection was not a prize taken from Camilla. It was a chain of memory that had to survive changing reigns, marriages, and personal loyalties. Camilla had believed the king's position would naturally protect her influence over everything inside their home. Charles was the monarch, and she assumed his wishes would carry enough weight to keep the collection where they had lived with it. Yet a private trust, an arrangement that legally protects property for a chosen purpose, could not simply be overturned by royal preference. Anne had known that from the beginning, and that knowledge now placed her one step ahead. The truth became even more painful when Camilla studied the inventory. Several paintings, pieces of silver, and personal objects she associated with her married life had never legally belonged to Charles. They were controlled by an older family structure, one that named Anne as their final custodian. Then another detail surfaced. Months before the solicitor's letter arrived, the king's sister had personally entered Clarence House and inspected the collection without informing its current mistress. That visit was connected to the handwritten warning about interference, and it meant Anne had seen something serious enough to begin preparing long before Camilla knew she was in danger. That secret inspection had not been routine, and the incident that triggered it would become the moment every person inside Clarence House remembered as the point of no return. The inheritance dispute did not begin with the solicitor's letter. It began months earlier during a private evening at Clarence House, when a seemingly minor decision exposed a far deeper struggle over ownership, memory, and royal authority. No cameras recorded what happened. No public announcement followed. Yet by the time one historic object was carried from its usual place, Princess Anne had already decided that silence was no longer enough. Camilla had begun reorganizing several rooms ahead of a private diplomatic reception. She believed Clarence House needed to reflect the present reign rather than remain frozen in the habits of the past, and Charles had allowed her wide freedom over the household. That freedom mattered because she had spent years proving she belonged there, arranging the residence as both a royal setting and a private home. Yet several objects were protected by strict preservation instructions, meaning written rules required them to remain secure, intact, and under approved family control. Among them were an old writing desk, a group of family portraits, and a cabinet holding letters connected to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. The decision came quickly. Camilla ordered the correspondence cabinet moved into storage and asked that selected letters be transferred to a more private archive controlled by her own household. She saw the change as practical, even respectful. But when Princess Anne arrived unexpectedly and found two attendants carrying the cabinet through a corridor, the atmosphere hardened at once. She asked who had authorized the removal. The Queen Consort did not step back. "This is my home now," she said. Anne stared at her for a long moment before answering. "It is your residence. That does not make every memory inside it yours." The words landed harder than anger. Camilla dismissed the distinction, insisting that nothing was being destroyed or sold. But the Princess Royal did not accept that reassurance. She watched the cabinet disappear towards storage, and both women understood that something had shifted between them. That night, Anne examined the trust papers in a documented review with the family's legal advisors. A trust is a legal arrangement that protects property for a specific purpose and limits who may control it. Buried inside those papers was a dormant protection clause, allowing authority over the entire collection to pass to her if designated objects were altered, dispersed, or placed at risk. She now had the power to act, but she did not use it immediately. Instead, Anne approached Charles in private and placed the documents before him. The king understood the choice at once. He could shield his wife and risk breaking an old family promise, or honor the arrangement and expose Camilla to a humiliation she would never forget. That choice brought Charles, Camilla, and Anne into the same room, and transformed a legal disagreement into the most painful family confrontation of the reign. The meeting began without raised voices. That restraint made it more dangerous. Charles stood near the fireplace, Anne remained beside the closed door, and Camilla placed the solicitor's letter on the table between them, like evidence in a trial. 3 members of one family had entered the room, but loyalty, marriage, and duty had divided them before a single accusation was spoken. Then Camilla looked directly at the king. Camilla had demanded this meeting because she refused to be managed through aides, lawyers, or household officials. She wanted Charles to explain the decision himself, without polished language or protective distance. The king had agreed because the dispute now threatened both his marriage and the authority of the monarchy. Anne arrived carrying the original preservation documents, while the queen consort brought a handwritten list of objects she believed should remain permanently inside her personal apartments. Preservation documents are formal records that set rules for protecting historic possessions and limit who may move, alter, or control them. Camilla pushed the letter across the table. "You let her take the life we built here." Charles did not touch it. His silence deepened the accusation, and she watched him as though waiting for one word that might still rescue her dignity. None came. Anne stepped forward and said she was taking nothing for herself. When the queen accused her of using the collection to humiliate her, the Princess Royal opened the trust file and placed one finger against the relevant clause. A trust is a legal arrangement that protects property for a specific purpose, rather than for one person's private use. "It belongs to history," she said, "not to whoever feels closest to it." Charles finally admitted the part he had concealed. He knew Anne had started the legal review after the cabinet incident, but he believed the process would cover only that protected object. He had not expected the solicitors to transfer authority over the entire Clarence House collection. Camilla turned toward him sharply. The king's confession did not soften the blow. It proved that discussions had taken place while she remained unaware. The queen asked the only question that still mattered. Would he challenge the decision? Charles looked at his wife, then at his sister, and the room seemed to hold its breath. After a long silence, he said the legal advice was final. Using royal pressure to reverse it would damage the crown and make the monarchy appear willing to break its own agreements for personal convenience. Camilla gathered her list and moved toward the door. "Then I know where I stand," she whispered. Anne remained behind after she left, because one final condition in the documents had not yet been explained. Camilla believed the confrontation had revealed the full betrayal, yet the most consequential clause was still lying unopened beneath Charles's hand. Royal power often appears limitless from the outside, but inside the monarchy, old promises can bind even a king. The final clause in the Clarence House arrangement did exactly that. It did not merely identify Anne as the inheritor. It restricted Charles from interfering, prevented Camilla's household from selecting protected items, and required an independent inventory before anything could be moved. For the first time, Charles understood how little control remained. Charles read the non-interference clause twice. A non-interference clause is a legal rule preventing one person from using rank or influence to alter an agreed decision. The king removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes, while Anne waited in silence. The collection had been protected through a private family settlement designed to stop important possessions from being scattered whenever marriages, reigns, or royal households changed. That mattered because the objects inside Clarence House were not simple decorations. They carried family memory, legal history, and connections to people who could no longer defend their wishes. Anne's authority came from more than her name in the documents. The Princess Royal had built a reputation for continuity, discipline, and loyalty to older family commitments. She also had a direct bond with several relatives whose letters, portraits, furniture, and personal objects formed the heart of the collection. Charles understood why she had been chosen, but understanding did not make the decision easier. He admitted that Camilla would see his obedience as abandonment. She had trusted him to protect the home they had built, and now he was preparing to stand aside while another woman controlled what remained inside it. Anne answered without anger. She told her brother that breaking a solemn arrangement to protect his wife's feelings would turn a private wound into an institutional scandal. A private family settlement is a binding agreement used to control how important possessions are protected and passed on. If the monarch ignored it, every future promise made by the royal household could be questioned. Charles continued reading and found the next blow. Camilla could keep only objects clearly documented as personal gifts. Everything else had to be examined, catalogued, and approved under Anne's supervision. Then his attention stopped on a signature at the bottom of a later acknowledgement. It was his own. Years earlier, during a period of family planning, the king had accepted the protection terms without imagining they would one day stand against his wife's wishes. Anne closed the file and delivered the final consequence. The inventory team would arrive within 48 hours. Camilla would not be given weeks to prepare, and Charles would not be allowed to delay the process. The legal battle was over, but the emotional consequences were about to become visible in every opened cabinet, numbered painting, and object marked to leave Camilla's rooms. 2 mornings later, Clarence House no longer felt like a home. It felt like a place being measured for departure. Archivists moved carefully through the rooms, solicitors checked lists against engraved numbers, and small red labels began appearing beneath objects Camilla had lived beside for years. Nothing was taken that day, yet every label carried the same message. This belongs to a future in which you have no final say. Camilla moved through the house in silence as the inventory continued around her. An inventory is a formal record listing each protected object, its condition, and where it must go. Every painting was photographed, every cabinet was opened, and every item was assigned either a future destination or a preservation status before Princess Anne formally assumed control. The process mattered because once it was complete, no piece could be quietly removed, exchanged, or claimed through personal memory alone. The Queen's household received strict instructions not to move, conceal, or privately pack anything until the legal review ended. Camilla understood the order, but she felt its cruelty. These were the rooms where she had celebrated private milestones, endured difficult family talks, and tried to build a secure life beside Charles. Now even her staff had to ask permission before touching the objects around her. Camilla entered the library and stopped beneath a silver-framed family photograph. A red label had been fixed beneath it. She removed the marker without thinking, held it between her fingers, then slowly replaced it when a solicitor entered. Neither of them spoke. The silence said enough. Her longtime dresser approached later and asked whether she should begin packing the Queen's personal possessions. Camilla looked toward the half-open cabinets and answered, "Not yet." Her voice broke on the second word. That small failure of control revealed more than any public statement could have done. The next discovery cut deeper. One cabinet held letters she had always believed were private exchanges shared with the king. Yet several had been historically classified, meaning they were considered important records because they discussed the crown and earlier royal crises. Charles had written them as a husband, but history had claimed them as the words of a monarch. Camilla then learned that Anne had requested the most sensitive material be transferred first. The Princess Royal did not distrust her brother. She feared grief and anger might lead someone to make an irreversible choice before the process ended. Resentment rose until a handwritten note arrived. Anne asked to meet away from Clarence House, with no solicitors, aides, or royal secretaries present. For the first time since the decision, the two women would meet without documents between them. And what Anne carried into that room was not another legal demand, but a truth Camilla had never expected to hear. Camilla arrived prepared for another warning. Anne arrived carrying nothing. No file, no inventory, no written instructions. Only the weight of a decision that had wounded one woman and burdened the other. They met in a small private sitting room with no aides outside the door, and no king present to soften their words. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Anne made a confession that changed the meaning of the inheritance. Anne had chosen a neutral family residence so Camilla would not feel trapped inside Clarence House, the place now tied to every accusation between them. The decision mattered because this was the first time they had spoken alone since the cabinet incident. Charles was absent as husband, brother, and monarch, meaning neither woman could hide behind his authority or use him to soften the truth. Camilla spoke first. She told Anne that losing the collection felt like being told she had only ever been a temporary occupant in a life she had fought decades to earn. The Queen had endured public suspicion, private doubt, and years of being treated as though acceptance could be withdrawn at any moment. Clarence House had become proof that she belonged beside Charles. Now the inheritance made that proof feel borrowed. Anne listened without interrupting. The Princess Royal then admitted that she understood the cruelty of that feeling, even if she had never shown it. She said she had not activated the clause to shame Camilla, weaken her marriage, or suggest that her place beside the king meant nothing. The clause was a legal condition allowing control of protected property to change when specific risks appeared. To her, using it had been an act of duty, but she now understood why it had felt like rejection. Anne then revealed the deeper reason through a documented private account prepared for the family archive. Before her death, the late queen had asked her to ensure that emotionally important family objects were never absorbed into the politics of any future marriage or court. She had not named Camilla. She had spoken about every generation that would follow. Yet the request had stayed with Anne, and the cabinet incident convinced her that the promise could no longer remain passive. The Princess Royal offered a compromise. Several objects with deep personal meaning to Camilla could remain with her through a lifetime loan, an arrangement allowing someone to use or keep an item without owning it legally. Anne would retain authority over preservation, but the queen would not lose every piece tied to her marriage. Camilla did not accept warmly or immediately. When Anne rose to leave, however, she quietly asked her to sit down again. Their private agreement would not remain hidden for long, and when the inheritance became public, one image outside Clarence House would transform a family wound into a national reckoning. By sunrise, the private legal decision had escaped the palace walls. Broadcasters interrupted their morning programs, royal commentators filled every studio, and the words, "Anne inherits Clarence House collection," dominated the national conversation. Yet it was not the legal language that captured public emotion. It was a photograph of Camilla leaving the residence alone, her face composed but exhausted, while removal crates stood just beyond the open doorway. Camilla watched the coverage without speaking, as the palace issued a brief statement confirming the arrangement. The statement focused on preservation, continuity, and a private family settlement, which meant a legally protected agreement controlling how important possessions would be cared for and passed on. It avoided any mention of personal conflict because the monarchy needed the decision to look orderly, not wounded. Yet the public understood that something deeper had happened inside Clarence House. The country divided quickly. Some praised Princess Anne for defending royal history with discipline and refusing to let personal feeling weaken old promises. Others saw the Queen's exclusion as a humiliating reminder that acceptance within the monarchy still had limits. One presenter described the collection as a legacy passing around the Queen rather than through her. Charles reached for the remote and turned off the television before Camilla could react. The king said nothing, but she knew he had heard every word. Anne received messages praising her resolve, yet the celebration unsettled her. The Princess Royal had never wanted Camilla's pain treated as entertainment, or her own duty presented as revenge. She instructed her office not to encourage any account describing the settlement as one woman defeating another. The decision might have strengthened Anne's authority, but it had also exposed a family wound to the entire nation. The sharpest public moment arrived on a newspaper front page. A full-width image of Clarence House's open doorway appeared beneath the headline, "Anne gets the past. Camilla keeps the crown." By midday, a quiet crowd had gathered outside the gates. Some carried flowers for the Queen. Others debated whether the inheritance represented justice, cruelty, or simply the cold discipline of royal life. The palace then released a second statement, confirming that Camilla would retain selected objects on lifetime loan. A lifetime loan allows a person to keep and use an item for life without gaining legal ownership. The announcement revealed that Anne's private concession had already changed the official settlement. Attention now turned toward the first transfer ceremony. Camilla and Anne would have to stand together as the first protected object changed hands, proving whether their fragile understanding could survive beyond a closed room. When the final inventory was signed, and the first protected object changed hands, the monarchy would deliver its verdict not through another statement, but through the conduct of the two women at the center of the storm. The final moment was quieter than the scandal that preceded it. There were no accusations, no lawyers speaking across polished tables, and no headlines being read aloud. Inside Clarence House, Camilla stood beside the correspondence cabinet that had triggered the entire crisis. Anne waited across from her as the transfer document was placed between them. This time, Camilla did not resist. She picked up the pen, signed her name, and closed the wound herself. Camilla understood what the signature meant. The completed settlement gave Princess Anne permanent custodial control of the historic Clarence House collection, while allowing the Queen to retain a carefully selected group of objects on lifetime loan. Custodial control means legal responsibility for protecting, recording, and managing important possessions without treating them as private personal property. The collection would remain connected to the royal family, and Anne would oversee its conservation, archives, and future display rather than claim it as her own. The Queen signed the final inventory, then rested her hand briefly against the Queen Mother's cabinet. That cabinet had become the symbol of everything she had tried to protect, and everything she had misunderstood. She looked at Anne and said, "Protect it better than I tried to." The words carried regret, but they also carried honesty. Camilla had acted from attachment, not cruelty, and now she finally accepted that love for the past did not automatically grant ownership over it. Anne answered without triumph, "I will protect what it carries." "You must protect what you have built." The Princess Royal understood that Camilla's place beside Charles could not be measured by inherited furniture, private letters, or historic rooms. The Queen had built a marriage, survived public rejection, and earned a role that no inventory could erase. Anne had gained the collection, but she accepted it as a burden of preservation, not a personal victory. Charles entered only after the transfer document had been signed. The king looked from his wife to his sister, and thanked them for ending the conflict, without forcing the crown to choose publicly between marriage and duty. He did not reverse the decision, and Camilla no longer asked him to. She had lost authority over the collection, but she had not lost her position, her marriage, or the life she had created beside him. The truth now stood clear. Royal history could be inhabited, loved, and shaped, but never fully possessed. Camilla's devastation came from mistaking belonging for ownership. Anne's victory came from understanding that inheritance was not about taking the past, but carrying it intact. The Queen remained beside the king. His sister became the guardian. Clarence House was no longer a battlefield. The cabinet was carried away, the doors closed, and the decision stood complete. Camilla would continue shaping the present, while Anne preserved the past that no one, not even a queen, was permitted to claim as her own. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.